All right. So welcome everyone. Lovely to see all of your faces, or many of your faces. Welcome everyone. Just kind of zooming through here. Hello there. And Georgine is in Vienna, Austria. You're our representative from Europe. You're representing Europe today, the European community. Welcome to you, and welcome to everyone who's joining us from more distant places, and everyone who's in our DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Wonderful to see you be back together again. It's been a momentous week, of course, with the verdict in the Chauvin trial, and I think probably many of us feel very relieved, and important to remember that it's just one thing, one verdict, one important one, but all the work is still to happen. Just holding that and all that's going on around us in our hearts. We're hopefully getting more and more people vaccinated, and moving towards a time when we can be back together again, and looking forward to that, both in kind of the informal ways, but also in terms of these kind of gatherings, classes and retreats. I feel it particularly for retreats where, it doesn't work so well to be on a Zoom screen, I don't think, for hours and hours every day, but being together in person, is wonderful. So hope in the fall again we can get back to that, and to the classes. I've said we will go back, I think, in person, but we'll keep the online going so that we won't end this. And one of the gifts of this, the kind of the silver lining of the cloud, has been we've had so many people, not just this class, but many of the offerings of IMCW and of the Center for Mindful Living, having people from all over joining us, and it's been a real joy and a gift, really. People becoming part of this community, even if they're while they're in California or Saskatchewan or Florida, so many other places, Maine, New Jersey, New York, etc. So that's been a wonderful thing. And so welcome, and it's really good to see everyone. Today, the theme of, I'm going to talk, as many of you know, I began a course just last week on the Four Noble Truths. So a lot of my attention is going in that direction. And I have a talk, I hope it'll be a relatively short talk, not too long a talk today, on the Four Noble Truths as the key to the end of suffering. And I want to look at this metaphor, using the word key in its meaning, in the metaphor of a key, that we unlock a door with, rather than key in the way that we, often use it now as making a key point, or a key decision has to be made, or, meaning important or central. I'm thinking of it more in terms of, these teachings as really like a key to ending our suffering. So what we'll do today, as we have been doing in the last couple of months, is we'll begin with a period of meditation. That'll hopefully help us settle and arrive and open to what's alive for us, open for what's here in the body and the heart and the mind. And then I'll share talk today, and then Emily will lead us in some movement. So welcome back, Emily. Good to see you. And then we'll have breakout rooms, breakout groups today. And you're invited to join those. They're a nice opportunity to just check in with friends and colleagues and fellow practitioners and just talk a little bit about what's going on, what's present for you in this moment at this time. And then we'll come together, back together in the full group. And if there's time, maybe a couple of questions and finishing off with a meditation at the end. Shorter meditation at the end and some announcements, and that's kind of the format we've been using, and I think it seems to work quite well. So maybe we'll just begin with a meditation. Invite you to kind of find a posture, taking some moments to arrive and settle. So taking your seat. It's nice to think, helpful, I think, to think about, in almost as a ritual when we come to sit in meditation, formally taking our seat. You can think of the archetype, maybe of the Buddha sitting under the tree, sitting in a posture that embodies in dignity, a settledness, grounded here between the earth and the sky. Even if the mind hasn't really yet settled, we can invite the body into this mode of settling, posture of dignity. If it's helpful to you, you can close your eyes, let your attention come inward. Letting yourself arrive, you might drop out, consciously drop the attention down out of the thinking mode where we spend a lot of our time thinking, planning, worrying, daydreaming. And consciously come down into the body, feel the contact with the surface beneath you, the chair or the cushion, the bench. Feel the contact of your hands with whatever they're touching, your lap or your knees or your thighs. Letting yourself settle into being here. It can be helpful to take a few minutes at the beginning of a meditation to consciously invite ourselves to arrive, to help. There's some simple practices we can do to help us settle. One is to just invite the breath to deepen, so connecting with your breathing, breathing in, breathing out. Nice full deep in breath and out breath. Filling the lungs, filling the chest, filling the body with breath, and then releasing, relaxing, letting go on the out breath. Notice how it feels to take a nice deeper in-breath and out-breath. Consciously releasing any stresses, any tensions as you breathe out. As we breathe in, we energize the body, bring energy in. And as we breathe out, we relax. Let go. And in your own time, whenever you're ready, just coming back into the natural rhythm of the breath. And you might invite a smile to your face as a way of sending a message to your brain and to your nervous system that you can relax, can be at ease. Inviting the smile down into the body, into the heart. Notice what happens. Is there any change in the body, in the feelings, in the energy in the body when you invite a smile? And you might take some moments to reflect on some things in your life that you're thankful for, to appreciate. Just taking some moments for gratitude can be a powerful practice, getting us out of our heads and just appreciating our life, what we have to be thankful for. So many things, and yet we can be so focused on what's wrong and what we lack and what we don't have, you know, what we're worried about, what we wish we had. So we can get caught up in that kind of craving mind, needy mind, or aversive mind. And just coming back to gratitude can help us to remember what's already here, already present, always available to us. Not necessarily this thing isn't always available, but enough in our life to be grateful for. The loved ones, the support we have, our friends, family members. Be our measure of health, security, our practice, our spiritual practice, our religious practice, nature, the birds, the animals, the trees, the sun and the stars. All the things that make our life easy or make it beautiful come to us as a kind of grace. Appreciating what we have. Often come back to Martha Postlethwaite's poem, Clearing, where she speaks of moving out of the dense forest of our lives and creating a clearing. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your open, cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world, so worthy of rescue. So we might see this formal time of meditation, of practice, as creating a space where we can put aside, the busyness and the to-do lists, all of the things we need to take care of, and we let our attention come inward, create a space and open, without resistance and defendedness, just open to what's arising in the body and the mind and the heart, the spirit. Just to see what arises out of this, out of the stillness, out of being here, being present. Inviting an attitude of kindness and acceptance to whatever is present for you right now. You might just do a brief scan of your consciousness, the body, the emotions, the mind, and notice what's predominant. What's standing out right now. There might be some heaviness, some sadness, or some grief present. Can you make space for that? Just to allow what's here to be here, to come, to go, in its own time, when we don't get into a fight with our experience. Maybe a feeling of peace and well-being. Just allow yourself to open to that, to feel that, to let that, maybe let it spread, let it move through you. If there are pleasant feelings, really to enjoy them, not to cling to them. It's the clinging that's the problem, not the enjoying. So just opening to what's here, the pleasant, the unpleasant, the in-between. Inviting an attitude of acceptance and kindness to whatever's appearing, whatever's arising in you, and towards anything coming in from the world, sounds and images. See if you can allow the container of awareness, of compassionate awareness, to hold whatever's present right now. And if it's helpful, you can use the breath as a home base or an anchor for your awareness. And those as metaphors for just being here, this coming back to home when the mind wanders off into thought. It's coming back to this home base, or the anchor kind of grounding us here in the present. And just perhaps pulling us back when we do go off. Can this moment be a moment of peace, a moment of acceptance of whatever is here? We have to start where we are. The mind might say, oh, I wish I wasn't so tired or restless. But what's here right now is here. And what we can really bring to this moment is our attitude, our way of being with our experience. That's what kind of brings about the possibility of helpful, skillful change, is the willingness to be with what's here, the willingness to say yes to what is, to this moment. In the words of Dorothy Hunt, peace is this moment without judgment, this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Peace is this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Remembering that you can always come back. Maybe the mind is very active. There might be things in your life that are calling for your attention and you keep getting pulled there. Worries about something or remorse about something in the past, something you've done or said, or thinking about some experience. So we can have a lot of energy pulling us off, pulling us away. And just to recognize that with kindness, and to, when we do get pulled into stories, plans, memories, daydreams, whatever, we can just, when we notice that, when we wake up to that, just incline the mind back again. We're not making it wrong that the mind is busy or active or whatever. We're just noticing it with kindness and bringing the attention back, training the mind. This poem is called Getting Up Early by Anne Porter. Just as the night was fading into the dusk of morning, when the air was cool as water, when the town was quiet and I could hear the sea, I caught sight of the moon, no higher than the rooftops. Our neighbor the moon, an hour before the sunrise, she glowed with her own sunrise, gold in the gray of morning, world without town or forest, without wars or sorrows. She paused between two trees, and it was as if in secret, not wanting to be seen, she chose to visit us so early in the morning. I'm just going to put the title and author of that. Welcome to you, Miranda, in the UK. So we have at least 2 European representatives today. That's nice. Welcome to you. And welcome to anyone who joined us during the meditation. Good to be with you, good to have you here. And I want to share some reflections. The theme, as I mentioned, was these teachings on suffering and the end of suffering, which everyone has heard of, the Four Noble Truths, as the key to the end of suffering. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this metaphor of a key, I think, is a really helpful one. And what I would like to do is to kind of walk through just the way this metaphor can be a really helpful one and can allow us to kind of, in a way, unlock these teachings that in turn can, unlock the prison of suffering that we can be caught up in. The Four Noble Truths are really, the Buddha said, the kind of the essential teachings on freeing ourselves from suffering. And understanding the way they operate really is like a key to open a door. And I had an interesting experience just reflecting on what I was going to share today in the last couple of days on this theme of the key. And what I want to begin with is to talk a little bit about metaphor. In the instructions in the meditation, we have, obviously the poetry brings in metaphors, the clearing and the dense forest of our lives and the guest house and all of these things. But even the metaphor of, the anchor or the home base, in meditation, that's it, kind of operate as metaphors. And metaphors and metaphor play a really central role in the Buddha's teachings. It was a culture 2,500 years ago, it wasn't, it was a technologically much less developed culture, much more, in some ways, down to earth, kind of, planting and feeding yourself and your families and the community, and just very, very grounded. And, a lot of the metaphors are very much, kind of objects and things that people would be very familiar with. And the Buddha taught all the time using metaphors, and so, seeing metaphors as really figures of speech that point to something else in order to help us understand or help to convey an image or an idea or bring in something, some beauty or whatever. And just some examples, and there's so many, one could choose from, of the way the Buddha used metaphor. So he talked about seeing the teachings, his teachings of the Dharma, as like a raft. A raft could take you across the river to the other side. So these teachings were like a raft. He used the parable of a raft, of the teachings, taking you to the other side of the river, taking us from suffering to freedom. And, he once asked, does it make sense that once you've taken the raft across the river, do you carry it around on your shoulders all the time? And obviously the monks are, the people listening say, no, you don't carry it around on your shoulder. You use it to do what it's, what it's there to do. And then you put it aside and it's available to you. In the same way, the teachings are for getting you to the other side. They're not for holding on tightly to. Obviously, they're for using and, valuable. Another image that the metaphor that the Buddha used, or image that the Buddha used, is of a path. The Eightfold Path. He spoke of, his teachings as a path. So what is a path? A path takes you through the woods, or takes you to, from your front gate to the door of your house. A path, it, takes you from one place to another. So the path takes us from suffering, from being tangled up, to being free of suffering. This is the purpose of the path. So that's another metaphor that the Buddha used. He spoke of the teachings of the Four Noble Truths as like an elephant's footprint. All of the other teachings fit within the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, as in the way that every other animal's footprint fits within the elephant's footprint. So that as an image. It's a simile rather than a metaphor, but that doesn't make a big difference here. It's a kind of an image that helps to convey, okay, this is how these teachings operate. This indicates how important this particular teaching is, because it encompasses every other teaching of the Dharma. They're all included in this teaching of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha used the person, the personification of Mara, M-A-R-A, this being that personifies greed, hatred, and delusion, Mara. And it's a wonderful image, personified by this individual, that whenever after the Buddha's awakening, Mara would come along, to try to tempt the Buddha, to try and pull him away from the path of, teaching and awakening. And when the Buddha saw Mara, Mara would then be seen and would scurry away. So Mara is this kind of personification. In the same way, if we see anger or hatred or fear come up, the seeing and recognizing it allows it to allows us to untangle ourselves from the emotion or from the mind state, or in a deeper way allows that emotion, that problematical response to self-liberate, to kind of free itself. It's not so much a doing on our part, it's just a seeing, and then there can be a freeing. There's a wonderful metaphor of the three refuges, or the three jewels. So those are two different metaphors. The refuges are metaphors for a safe, reliable dwelling place. So the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha are a safe refuge. They're a place, a safe dwelling. You don't want to have, it's that, what was the kid's story of, the pigs, three little pigs, right, getting their house blown down by the wolf, because they built an unsafe house, and the one with the, with the solid, solid, built of bricks, etc., stayed up, and they were safe. And the same with the refuges as really these reliable, reliable dwelling places, reliable supports, and the jewels as these refuges, these teaching, these three jewels of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha are something of great value. So that metaphor, or those two metaphors. And on his enlightenment under the tree, under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha used the metaphor of a house builder to describe the way we build suffering in our lives. Here is what he said. After his awakening, after Mara had appeared and the Buddha had touched who are you to think you're enlightened, Mara said. And the Buddha touched the ground and said, the earth is my witness. The earth is my witness. And after his awakening, this is the poem that has come down to us in the teachings. He says, seeking but not finding the house builder, I traveled through the round of countless births. Oh, painful is birth ever and again. House builder, you have been seen. You have now been seen. You shall not build the house again. Your rafters have been broken down. Your ridgepole is shattered. My mind has attained the peace of nirvana and reached the end of every kind of craving. So this idea of the way we fabricate suffering, like a house, like building a house with its ridgepole and its rafters, and all of these metaphors of building a house of suffering. And the Buddha says, no house can now be built because they've all been destroyed. Greed, hatred, delusion, all of these aversive, afflictive qualities have been abandoned. They've been completely dug up and eradicated. So the house can't be built again. The house of suffering cannot be built again. I find that an incredibly powerful metaphor. And there are many other metaphors and images that the Buddha uses in his teachings. And so as I was preparing, and I began this week, as I said, this course on the Four Noble Truths, the metaphor of these Four Noble Truths as a key, as a key to unlock a door, came to me more and more. The way these teachings really function as a key to unlock ourselves from the prison of suffering. And I'll talk about the ways these teachings do that in a minute. But first, I had this thought. I said, I wonder why the Buddha didn't use this metaphor. It's in a way, it felt such an obvious metaphor to me. The key, and the Buddha, as I said, has wonderful metaphors. And it seemed to be so clear and so helpful. And then I had a kind of moment. I said, did they even have keys in the Buddha's time? I asked that. And of course, I went to my key source on this, Ms. Google, and checked it out. And And of course, keys in some way have been around for 5,000 or 6,000 years, but they actually didn't come into wide usage until the time of the Romans. The Romans were a little bit later, they didn't get overthrown, etc., till about 1,000 years after the Buddha's time. And I also did a little search for key, as a metaphor in the Buddha's teachings. I didn't find really anything. So the conclusion I've drawn, and I've done a lot of reading over the last 30 years in the sutras, and as far as I can remember, I don't remember that image, certainly not as a common image in the Buddha's teachings. And I think that's because keys weren't really a thing very much in that more earlier society 2,500 years ago. And so wouldn't really have come up for the Buddha in an obvious, as an obvious metaphor, because, in some ways he used similar metaphors. He did talk about being released from prison and being released from debt as images for ending suffering. Freeing ourselves from suffering is similar to being freed from prison or being freed from debt or an obligation we owe to people or to someone. I haven't seen other teachers very much use the metaphor of a key either, and it may be because the Buddha didn't use it, and so people tend to stay with a lot of the images that the Buddha used. I think that's there's some wisdom in that. But what I want to say now, why I think this is a really helpful metaphor for these teachings of the Four Noble Truths, and unlocking ourselves, freeing ourselves from suffering. So I want to begin with a common situation where we find ourselves caught up in suffering from time to time. Maybe we can find ourselves in this kind of situation often. So the example I would give is just being caught up in a conflict with someone. It could be with your partner, it could be with your child or with a family member. It could be somebody at work. It could be, somebody we encounter, out in life, that gives, we have a hard time with or whatever, a neighbor. It could be any situation where we find ourselves in a struggle, in some kind of conflict. It may not even be an external conflict. It may be just that we feel the conflict in ourselves. Oh, they're this kind of person. And they may not even very much know that we're feeling that way, or we don't like them or whatever. But we all have some examples of this, and maybe some of us have situations where we're in a really difficult situation with somebody, but we all know what that feels like. I mean, I don't have to, explain it to anybody. It could be where we're feeling angry, we're feeling annoyed with somebody, we're feeling frustrated, we're feeling that they're judging us, we're feeling sad or small. It could even be not with somebody else, it could be with ourselves. We're feeling annoyed with how we've acted. So just creating that as a kind of very common scenario of suffering. So what I say in any of those situations is that we're experiencing some expression or some manifestation of suffering. And when I use that term suffering, I mean, and I kind of unpack it a little bit. We're wanting things to be other than they are. We're in a struggle with the way things are. There's a feeling of unsatisfactoriness. This doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. There's contraction, there's tension. There's a sense of, I don't like this. I don't want this. I want them to be different. I want the situation to be different. This is unpleasant. It's painful. It doesn't have to be all of those, but just some expression of like we wanting this situation or this experience or this person to be different than it is. Much of our suffering has that feeling to it. You know, we're angry. Well, we don't like this situation as it is. We don't like this person that we're angry at being like, at acting as they are right now, or being who they are. We don't like ourselves, you know, and how we're feeling right now, or how we're acting. You know, we're eating in ways that we don't think are good for us, but we can't seem to change it. So we're annoyed, or we're frustrated with ourselves, or we're judging ourselves. All of these ways. And really, in finding an end to suffering, very, very often the place to begin, we can begin in different places, but very often the place to begin is where we experience suffering, where we experience a sense of, I don't like this, I don't want it, I want it to be different, or I want to have something I don't have. It's this sense of, you know, struggle with the way things are. When we experience that, that tends to be the place to kind of look and say, okay, there's something to pay attention to here. So whenever we find ourselves in these kind of painful, difficult feelings, emotions, mind states, wanting things to be different than they are, this is a clear signal of suffering, what the Buddha called dukkha. And dukkha has a kind of a, you know, covers a lot of those things that I've been talking about. It's not just one thing. It kind of is a kind of almost a global expression for a lot of these feelings of resistance and not wanting things to be as they are. You know, and so seeing suffering and investigating, paying attention to suffering is like putting the key in the door. You know, this is kind of step one. We kind of say, okay, I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to look at like what's going on here. I'm going to bring curiosity and interest to this kind of, oh yeah, this isn't very pleasant. I don't like this. Now, but rather than just going with the story of, I want it to be different, I've got to change this. We say, okay, let me look at this. Let me be curious about this. And then when we investigate our experience and we find suffering, the next step is to, in the Four Noble Truths, is to ask ourselves, what is my role in this suffering? What is my role in this suffering? When there's suffering, I or you or whoever is suffering will be implicated in the suffering. When we're suffering, the one who's suffering will be implicated in the suffering. So suffering isn't just bad things happening. Bad things aren't in themselves suffering. It's our relationship to the bad things that turn them into suffering. So we could have a, quote, bad thing, but if our attitude is one of kindness, of compassion, of acceptance, we're actually not suffering from that bad thing. You know, it may be what normally is a bad thing, but if we're not treating it as a bad thing, but we're practicing opening and being here and saying yes to what is, then we don't experience it as suffering. It's suffering when we get into some conflictual relationship with our experience, our situation, the person, etc. And the Buddha taught that it's our own, that our suffering comes from our unskillful relationship to our experience, not from the experience itself, but from that unskillful relationship to our experience. And he said it comes from struggling with our experience, which he called craving. He used the term craving to cover a number of different things. It can be the craving, which we're kind of familiar with, of like, I want this, I need this, I've got to have this, you know, a kind of addictive craving. But it also includes aversion, the pushing away of experience. It includes delusion, you know, disconnection, boredom, you know, it includes, you know, it covers a multitude of, you know, difficult experiences. So it's a broad term. And so in our hypothetical situation, we can ask, what is my role in my suffering here? And in my own experience, I've found there's always some way I'm wanting things to be different than they are. I'm wanting this person to be different, this situation to be different. And the fact that it is as it is, and I'm not accepting this, that's what's leading to the suffering. So it's my relationship. I'm wanting it to be different. That's the suffering. That's the suffering, not the person, not even what they're doing, but the fact that I'm in struggle, I'm in conflict with the way things are. And when I see that my craving is causing my suffering, then I can let go. The seeing clearly allows, it's like holding a hot coal. If I see clearly, I can, I can say, oh, I don't want to suffer. I want to let go of suffering. I want to find freedom. We see that and we can let go. This is the second noble truth. Craving as the cause of suffering, and letting go of craving leading to the end of suffering. So with this second noble truth, seeing the craving that's causing my suffering, I'm actually turning the key in the lock. This is actually this is good, because I only thought through this metaphor, and I think it actually works. Tell me if it works at the end, but because I've got to follow it through to the end. So this is, we put it in the lock, we turn the key. So seeing the craving. And then when I let go of craving and of clinging, this holding on, I experience freedom. And as Ajahn Chah says, and I've quoted this many times, let go a little and you'll experience a little freedom. Let go a lot, you'll experience a lot of freedom. Let go completely and you'll experience complete freedom from suffering. Your struggle with the world will be at an end. So we can talk about letting go a little or a lot or completely. And the Buddha pointed to the complete ending of suffering. And he called this nirvana, the complete eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion. And that quote that I said, the house builder has been seen and the house can't be rebuilt again. So for most of us, I would say, we're not dealing with the complete ending of suffering. For most of us, we're letting go a little or we're letting go a lot. And we're hopefully finding some freedom from letting go a little or letting go a lot. So in the example I gave, maybe we're seeing the way in which our own annoyance, our own frustration, our own resistance is causing our suffering. And in a small way, we're letting go. Maybe we're seeing that person that we've had a conflict with at work for so long. Maybe we find some moment to say, oh, they're just having a hard time right now. Or I recognize they're dealing with really difficult issues in their life. Or we just see their humanity and is saying, okay, I don't have to make a big story about them being a bad person. They're just, another human trying to struggle through. They may be acting unskillfully, but I don't have to hold on to that. I don't have to be in a conflictual relationship about that. And if I see that clearly, or I bring in loving kindness or compassion, then I can find a way. Then I can alleviate the suffering, or maybe end that suffering completely. So in this seeing clearly and the letting go, we find freedom. This is walking through the door. We've turned the key. We put it in the lock. We've turned it. Now, there's a little bit of a trick here, because the Buddha puts the path before the end of the path. He puts the third noble truth before the fourth noble truth. The ending of suffering. And then he comes back to the path to the end of suffering, the training of the mind and the heart to get there. So therefore, we walk through the door. But in order to walk through the door, I have to open the door. I have to open the door. And I do this through the practices that lead to the end of suffering. I do this through the practices of mindfulness and wise effort, and wise understanding, and living ethically, wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood. And particularly in the kind of situation we're looking at, it'll be through practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness will be at the key, at the core, you know, being aware of our experience, seeing where we're holding on, how we can let go. We'll be using wise effort. We'll be cultivating wise intention. We're doing this for a good end, you know, not to get rich or to get famous, but to free ourselves from suffering. We'll see, in seeing, you know, how clinging leads to suffering, craving leads to suffering, we're bringing in wise understanding. So all these elements of the path are helping me to see clearly, helping you to see clearly, so that we can walk through the door. So it's this the fourth noble truth, the practice, the path of training, the noble eightfold path that helps us to let go of clinging and leads us to the end of suffering. So the practices really in this image, this metaphor, help us to open the door. We can open the door, and then we come back to the third noble truth, we walk through the door. The third noble truth is walking through the door to freedom from suffering. The fourth noble truth is the opening of the door, which we need to do. Most of us need to do. We can't go straight through maybe if we reach a certain level of wisdom and letting go, we can walk through doors. I've certainly heard of these stories, haven't seen them in myself in practice. So we're free from suffering. So when I use this metaphor of the key, you know, I just find it such a helpful thing how we can bring this key of the Four Noble Truths to any area of suffering in our lives. And that then we can use the key to open the door to freedom from suffering. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. And I'd love your, you know, responses, reflections, you know, particularly what I'd invite you to do is to think about this as we go back into our lives and say, whenever I feel myself caught up in suffering, can I see where I'm implicated in the suffering, where I'm caught up in the suffering? What happens when I find the space to let go? What happens when I practice in certain ways, you know, or bringing awareness to it, or bringing wise effort, or wise intention, wise understanding into my practice, into this situation? Does it change things? Does it help me let go? And then see what happens. As I've shared in other times, you know, this expression of the Buddha's, ehipassiko, see for yourself. Don't believe anything just because somebody said it, because the Buddha said it, because somebody else said it. But to see for yourself, to test it in our own experience. Rachel, are we implicated in our own suffering even when we're the victim in an abusive relationship? That's an incredibly important question. And I do want to untangle that, unpack that. But maybe what we'll do first is have Emily lead us in some movements so we come back into our bodies. We'll do some small groups, and then we'll come back and I'll share some on that because it's a really important question. So thank you. And Emily, over to you.
So I would like to invite you all to stand up and just sway from side to side, from one foot to the other, shifting your weight. And then open up into the space around you. Arms at shoulder height, swaying to one side, then to the other, swaying, lifting one heel, and then the other as you move, side to side. And then slow it down, keep your hands at shoulder height. Open up to greet the open space in front of you. And then rise up, gather the energy of the sun, the clouds, the oxygen that we breathe, all of it, gather it and bring it to your heart. Gather the energy of all of us together, seekers, seekers of freedom from suffering with love and kindness, and bring that to your heart. And then gather the energy of the earth, that which provides so much abundance, and bring that to your heart. Then bring your arms out into cactus arms. Take an inhale to center. Exhale, lower your arms. Inhale up. Exhale, lower down. Inhale and rise. Exhale, lower. And then reach up, lengthening up. Grasp your left wrist in your right hand. Centering. Inhale, reaching up. Exhale, extend out to the right. Shifting your left hip to out further to the left and reaching. Breathing into that left rib cage. Inhale up. Switch wrists. Reaching up and out to the left. And exhale over. Tilting. Breathing into that right rib cage. And inhale up. Float your arms down. And have a private dance with your shoulders. Moving them individually and then back the other way. Allowing your arms to open this way and that, whatever works for you. And then together and then roll them the other way. Good. And now gather your hands behind your back. Inhale, lifting your head and your chest. Exhale, draw your arms away from your body, drawing your shoulder blades together. And then drop your hands back to your waist. Inhale again, lifting your head and chest. Exhale, draw your arms away from your waist. And then allow your hands to move down. Float your arms up. Allowing your body to fly for this moment. And the last move will be to come into a flat back by placing your hands above your knees. Inhale, reaching out and then dropping down, allowing your hands to drop towards the earth, feeling the pull of gravity as you lower your upper back, neck, head can drop to your chest, chin to chest, just breathing here. Feeling the release of your spine as it lowers down. Inhale, one deep inhale. Exhale with a sigh. And then bring your hands back above your knees. Press on your feet, roll up the spine, bring your hands to heart center and release out to the sky. Release to the room and to the earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Lovely as always. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Please feel free to share in the chat box anything you'd like to about what your experience was and in the groups, in the group, and anything that came out that would be helpful to share. I did want to come back to to Rachel's question: are we implicated in our own suffering, even when we are the victim in an abusive relationship? You know, what I want to do there, and I think Cassie, in her response, kind of spoke to it, that the suffering, you know, we could talk in a broad, general sense of the suffering of being in that situation. You know, it would be, you know, quite completely appropriate to use the term suffering, you know, in a generic way for that situation. But in the way that the Buddha is talking about suffering, he is speaking about it in terms of not just the thing itself, but the situation itself, the experience itself, but in terms of, you know, what makes it afflictive. You know, what I was saying before about a bad situation, clearly being an abusive relationship, in an abusive relationship is a bad situation. But it is possible in that situation to not suffer. You know, what would be wise action in that situation? You know, hopefully it would be to create boundaries, to do whatever you can to make you, yourself, and anyone else who's involved who may be harmed, to make sure that they're safe. There's nothing inherently suffering in that. That I would say is wise action. Obviously, we'd have to unpack the situation, know exactly what's going on, but that, you know, there's nothing contradictory to that. The suffering would be more coming from saying, I'm powerless, I can't do anything about this situation, I'm stuck in it, and I've got to go on being stuck in it. Then in that way, we would actually be, I mean, it's not a criticism of the person in that situation, but in terms of one's internal relationship to the situation, our actions in that situation would be kind of leading us to stay in a situation, a painful situation. So what I was speaking to was not so much what we do about it, what we, you know, how we relate. I'm really speaking to how we relate to that experience in ways that don't lead to suffering. So, you know, I could point back to Viktor Frankl's statement, you know, of being in Auschwitz concentration camp, which was, you know, one couldn't really imagine anything more a situation more terrible than that. And yet he said, you know, they could take everything from us, but the last of the human freedoms, the freedom to determine how we relate to our experience, to choose our own way. So he was saying, I think, very much the same as the Buddha is saying, that even in those situations, we have a choice of how we meet our experience. And that's where suffering, really, the suffering comes in. And I'm not talking about, you know, saying somebody should respond in this way or that way, or in any way judging or criticizing how somebody might respond in an abusive relationship, but really talking about how we really do own our own responses. Doesn't mean we're responsible for being in an abusive relationship, but how we meet our experience. That's the choice that we have. So, you know, wise action, I think, in any situation like that would be to do whatever we can to create boundaries, to get out, to, you know, to get out of the painful, you know, abusive situation. I hope that makes kind of a useful, you know, clarifies what the Buddha's teachings are saying and are pointing to. I want to also invite anyone, maybe just take a question before we have a final meditation, or anything anyone would like to share. And please raise your hand in the chat or raise your hand in person, and Pat or Cassie or one of us will see you. Is everyone doing okay? No dukkha, no suffering, no clinging, no suffering, no self, no problem.
I think Diane has a hand up. Diane in North Carolina.
Hi.
Okay, Diane.
I was just thinking that, thinking about how you had to recognize Mara was there in terms of like abusive situations, that sometimes there's not an awareness necessarily that, you know, there are different kinds of abuse, and that the first step would be, you know, I was thinking about the keys that you need to have that awareness first to see the suffering.
Yeah.
And that's the first step, I guess.
Yeah.
And that not everybody's there yet. You know, people are in difficult situations and may not recognize that.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you, Diane. I think that's really important, because certainly in those situations, there's a lot of internalizing of, you know, sometimes it's about, oh, it's my fault that this person is doing this, or if I do this, then they wouldn't do this bad thing. And, you know, we're not in those situations, that kind of situation, we're not seeing things as they really are. And the more clearly we can see, okay, this is wrong, this is harmful, you know, I need to empower myself, you know, do whatever I can, get support if I can, get out if I can, do what I can in that situation. And sometimes, you know, if we do get out of those situations, it can still take us some time to untangle ourselves from the ways that we've been, you know, not that we've been responsible for it, but we've believed that we were in some ways, and to kind of let go of that and begin to see clearly.
Yeah, and when there are power differentials, and especially for children, things like that.
Yeah, and so many
situations where you don't have liberty necessarily to do things differently. So anyhow, just wanted to, that's what came up as you were for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess, can I say something? I'm the one who asked about the your, you know, and being implicit in suffering if you're the victim in an abusive relationship. I guess just briefly for me, sometimes the Buddhist teachings sound a little bit, or actually sound a lot like what I would consider toxic positivity, where if you are empathetic and compassionate and open-hearted and express yourself, that, you know, or that you are in charge of your experience. And when you're being abused, if you do these things being open-hearted and whatnot to your abuser, it makes things worse because they take advantage of it, especially someone who's a narcissist. And unfortunately, the person who was abusing me was my own sister. And I was going to a therapist who insisted that I was, you know, half responsible for this relationship. And eventually I cut off my sister who was abusing me. And I mean, that was the only thing I could do, but the effects have lingered for years and years. And so anyway, and recently there was a study that when you are trying to be compassionate to the person who's abusing you, you end up with lower self-esteem, all kinds of things. So that's why, I don't know, when you talk about being in conflict with someone and then trying to do these lovely things, you know, it, you know, sort of triggers that.
Those are really, really important points, Rachel, and thank you for them. You know, what I would want to do is to make a distinction between kind of our inner response and what we do, you know, in the world or in relationship to the person. You know, so I spoke about boundaries. You know, if to come across as this loving kindness filled, compassionate Buddhist is a way of inviting more harm, then obviously that's not a wise way to respond. And to respond maybe just to be really firm with one's boundaries, very clear, and not externally, put out those, those signals really, because it's kind of they're kind of signaling in some way to the person and in terms of their interpretation. But the invitation from the Buddhist teachings is to not to close your heart, so to keep the heart open while protecting yourself and doing whatever you need to do. Jack Cornfield has said something that kind of stuck with me. He said, you can put somebody out of your life, but it's, best not to, one shouldn't put them out of your heart, and even that can seem like, a big job, if somebody has done real harm to you. But the invitation, in the teachings is, even if it's very hard and it may take years and years to get to forgiveness, and maybe we don't even do it in this lifetime, that the invitation is not to keep separation in our lives, even though we may need to do it in real terms, in physical terms, in terms of, I may never speak to that person again in my life, that abusive former partner, husband, or whatever. But insofar as we still carry around in our hearts, for example, a story, they were such a bad person, they did this to me, I wish them, all these bad things, then we're just carrying that burden with us. So the invitation, and I'm not saying it's easy to let go of that, but the invitation is to do what we need to do, in the, if you like, in the external world, in the relationship world, and then to keep opening, keeping our heart open. And it may take time to do that. But if we're holding on to anything internally, then we're still kind of caught up in suffering. A little story for this is, some of you may be familiar with this one. It was a story of two monks walking along. One was a kind of an older monk and one a younger monk, and they came to a stream, and they were, they'd been talking about the practice of Dharma, and as in the Buddhist tradition, monks are not supposed to have any contact with women or people of the opposite gender, sex, and so they came to this river, and it was very hard to get across. And one of the monks helped carry a woman across the stream, and then the monks walked in silence. Left her and walked. After they got it off across the stream, they were walking along, and in silence. And the younger monk said to the other one, "I'm really." I'm really surprised at you. We've taken these vows not to have any contact with women, and there you were carrying a woman across the stream. And the senior monk said to him, "Oh, you still seem to be carrying the woman with you. I left her on the other side of the stream." And just that story of kind of, like, what are we carrying around with us? Can we just leave it behind, and not carry? And I'm not saying that in a simplistic way, certainly not in these very, very painful, difficult situations. But that's really what we're working to do. We're working to let go of that inner kind of clinging in the heart, and doing whatever we need to do to be safe, to help others be safe, to limit harm, to end harm in the world. It's a longer discussion, but I hope that gets across some of the more nuanced, elements of the teachings. And I agree with you that that sometimes it comes across too simplistically, too much of a kind of a passive, passivity in the face of harm. If the teachings aren't put across in a skillful way. So thank you for that. I'm just looking at the time and I think it would be good to end with a short meditation, just to kind of come back inward and open to what's present. A lot has been shared, both in the meditation, the talk, the breakout groups, and in this sharing. So just invite you to open to whatever is present for you right now. Notice what's here in the body. How's the body feel? Can you relax a little bit more? Just open to what's here, open to what's present in the mood, emotions. And what's going on in the mind. Other thoughts, quieter, the mind more still, or is it, is there a lot going on? And just to meet what's here with kindness and with acceptance. Just to maybe take a moment to bring kindness to any difficulty you might be experiencing at this moment, or just at this time, in this period. Maybe breathing in a wish of compassion towards yourself, kindness towards yourself. And just feeling the connection with everyone else here, practicing together in community. You might breathe out a wish of loving kindness to all of us here, wishing everyone well. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be free from harm. May you live with ease and with kindness. So breathing in kindness to yourself, breathing out kindness to all who are here, and going outward into the world, to all who are suffering, to all beings. This poem is called A Gift by Denise Levertov. Just when you seem to yourself nothing but a flimsy web of questions, you are given the questions of others to hold in the emptiness of your hands, songbird eggs that can still hatch if you keep them warm, butterflies opening and closing themselves in your cupped palms, trusting you not to injure their scintillant fur, their dust. You are given the questions of others as if they were answers to all you ask. Yes, perhaps this gift is your answer. So finishing off, maybe reflecting on an intention we might want to bring back into the world as we go back into our lives today and for the week. maybe of kindness or of acceptance, compassion, forgiveness, joy. Thank you, everyone. It's been good being together today with you. We just have a few announcements to finish. I'll just say, as I do each week, particularly for anyone who's joining for the first time, maybe not familiar with our community or our practices, some of the practices, but there's no charge for the class. You are invited, if you would like to, if you're able to and inclined, to make a donation. Dana, D-A-N-A, of generosity is how the teachings have come down through 100 generations from the time of the Buddha to today around the world and in the West. And your support helps me to continue to teach, and appreciate your kindness, your generosity, and